So now I'm hitting record. Hello, Danielle. Hello, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, good. And there's Julia.
How are you?
Good. So you're at the studio, right?
Yes, I am.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, well, we're just about ready to roll here. I'm going to put myself on mute for just a minute.
Hi, Lydia.
Hi there.
Hi, gang. Hi, Laura Beth. Hi, Danielle.
Hi, Julia. Hi, Laura Beth.
Hi, Julia. Hi, Jen. Hi, Danielle, who I don't know. Hi.
Hi, Danielle. Nice to see you. Nice to see you, Lydia.
Nice to see you too, Jennifer.
I wish I was there with you, Julia. I have to be doing this from home because I have to jump off and go to the next thing.
Are we supposed to have
I have overlapping Zooms.
Are we supposed to have the mat this way or straight on?
I don't care. I actually think I can see more when you're diagonal or perpendicular to the camera. Yeah.
Oh.
But you should do what works for you. So.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, I'm back. Just had to get a cup of water there. So I'm at our apartment now in New York, and we're just getting ready to get things rolling. Okay, good to see you all. You know, as unfortunate as it is that that recording got messed up, the nice thing is we get to spend this extra time together, which is cool. So I'm going to put it on speaker view there. Now, Lydia, can you choose your view on your screen?
Yes, I
Okay,
am.
so yeah, so I'm going to be on speaker view because I'm the one doing the recording. And since I'll be doing the most talking, I think my screen should be the biggest. And that's how we will proceed. So before we get rolling, I'm just going to take a minute or two to check in with everyone. How's everyone doing?
Julia, do you know how many people we should be expecting?
Ooh, sorry, I was muted. I think there might be one more who said that they might. I can quickly.
No worries.
It's all right. We can just,
It was going to be 10 more.
Yeah.
So Leslie, would you just admit that person while I go make my cup of tea?
Oh, go make your cup of tea, honey. We won't be needing you for another few minutes. So, yeah, so for those of you that were with us last weekend, I'm just curious how you're doing. I often don't get this opportunity to check back in with folks. Usually I roll into town somewhere to a studio, I create massive amounts of confusion, and then I leave and don't have to deal too much directly with the consequences. So here we have a chance actually to check in and see how you're all doing, how some of the stuff we covered last weekend is sitting with you. So feel free just to unmute yourself and say anything you like at this point. So go for it. Anyone?
I tried it, Danielle.
Hey, Danielle, I see you.
I definitely, so I remember you saying about teaching class to only add in like maybe 10% each time, basically, but that we first need to digest it and do it ourselves. So I'm still doing part of my old ways, but I'm definitely been practicing the Warrior series the way that you have taught it. So my muscles are a little sore.
Yeah,
where they
absolutely.
Wouldn't be.
That's how you know it's working.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
as long as your joints aren't getting inflamed, that's fine. But the muscle soreness is actually a good result because the specific intention, as I'll review when we go through the whole thing again, is to work the musculature, particularly the musculature that we use for postural support, in ways that it often doesn't get worked when we practice other styles or forms of asana or vinyasa. So good on you for getting that soreness, right? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
So you're welcome. Yeah. Ibuprofen helps. So anything else? So now Magda, you're just, hi, how are you doing there?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, good. So now you weren't with us last weekend, were you?
I was in the corner.
Oh, you were in the corner. That's right. I'm sorry. Yeah, you were in the. Okay, I'm trying to visualize the room now. So you were sitting over there on that side of me, right?
Yes.
Okay. So how have you been absorbing, digesting what we covered?
It feels good. It feels good. I started doing the Warrior series more often, but I don't know if it's connected with that. But I started having a pain in my right foot. It's kind of like but not while doing the practice, but in my everyday life, I started having some pain in the middle of my right foot. So I was wondering if it's just because I'm just using my feet a little bit different, and it's just the way of my body to get used to that.
Yeah, that's pretty typical. If it's in like along where the arch is in sort of that area, it's almost sometimes like getting a stitch, except it's in your foot, you know, and not in your side when you're running. It's a similar kind of a thing. And that's, again, a good sign that some musculature is being asked to do things that it's just not accustomed to doing. And maybe there's not enough oxygen in that tissue. Does it have a burning quality to it, the discomfort you're feeling?
No, it's more like a stitch, like you said. It's just like a very intense, like the ice pick pain in the middle of my foot, and then it goes away. Yeah.
Yeah. That's.
Are you able to move it at all when that's happening and see if that releases it? Because the more oxygen you get into that tissue, the quicker it'll go away.
Yeah.
But it's just like 1 second while I'm like walking or standing in the kitchen, and it just like comes and then it goes right away. But it's like with I don't know. It's weird, but I guess that's the way, because I'm using my feet. I think I'm using them differently right now because I'm more aware of the feet, and I'm practicing more of this series. So.
Yeah, that's absolutely typical and characteristic of the ischemic kind of pain that I was referring to when we went over this initially. Yeah. So yeah, anything else? Just open to hearing from you. We have a lot of time on our hands here to go into some aspects of this that we probably didn't have a chance to cover initially in the first workshop session. So I'm kind of looking forward to it because there's only so much you can do of like practicing the Warrior series in 2.5 hours. It's not like I'm going to teach a 2.5 hour Warrior series. And what I will be able to do is to deconstruct it into some of its components, perhaps in ways that I didn't have a chance to do initially, which is kind of fun. So yeah, is there anything, Julia, you were raising your hand there? I see you. Go ahead.
I've been really diligent about checking in with the Samastitihi, even through my work day and when I'm not barefoot, wearing heels. So I'm always like, okay, where am I through the day? And it was incredible, even like on Saturday when we did this, and I realized that certain points of my foot have become a little bit not smart, as we said, that even by Sunday, it corrected itself, that I could see my foot, walking, using the right, heel, little toe, big toe, when walking forward. And of course, as you get into the hustle bustle of everyday life, and I'm trying to even be mindful of it when I'm driving, because I'm in the car so much. So I'm like,
okay,
how is my foot doing when I'm driving? Am I like leaning over to one side, to the other? So it's been very, very profound for me to just stop and pay attention. How am I on my feet? Because then it changes everything for me. Like it changes how my pelvis is. It changes how what's happening in my abdomen and my shoulder. You know, like it kind of like restructures everything for me with
absolutely, because it is the foundation. And you know, I mean, these are the lessons in being a better biped that we never got and should have at some point in our development. Because it is what's going on our feet is so fundamental to who we are as humans who walk upright. And if I had to choose just one body part to work on that has the potential for triggering the most change in the rest of the system, it would absolutely have to be the feet, because they are the foundation of how we uniquely get around this planet as the planet's only true biped mammals. And it links with a principle, which I don't think I remembered to state in the workshop last weekend, but it's implicit in a lot of the way I teach and the way Descachar taught. And I never heard him actually say this particular thing exactly how I'm saying it, but in terms of it being a principle, it's consistent with how he taught. And that is that if you can promote even a tiny bit of positive change in something a person does a lot of, that adds up to an enormous amount of positive change, you know? And so by targeting the things that we do the most of in our lives, and trying to produce even a little bit of positive change, a little bit more integration in those activities, then that has the potential for creating the most amount of transformation. And walking and standing obviously fall into that category. And the other thing that we do the most of on a moment-to-moment daily basis is breathing. And so even a tiny bit of positive change in the way we breathe or the way we relate to our breathing, that adds up to an enormous amount of potential change, positive change. So what you're describing there, Julia, just from, you know, what we did a week ago, and the sort of focus and the ability to sort of remember, wow, I can be paying attention to what's going on in my feet in this particular way. It changes everything. And as I think I did mention, it does set us up very well for, you know, living in these aging bodies, where when issues like balance and proprioception become that much more critical to our healthy functioning for the rest of our lives. You know, it's a little late when you're in your 70s or 80s to realize that you have major balance issues, and then, you know, you fall and you injure yourself, and then you have to catch up. So this is consistent with another one of the teachings Descachar was very fond of reminding us of, and it's actually was inscribed to the entrance of the KYM in Madras. It's a sutra. It's from Patanjali, and it goes Heyam Dukam Anagatam. And what that's reminding us is that the future suffering can be avoided through actions we can take now, right? The suffering that has yet to manifest can and should be avoided. Heyam Dukam Anagatam. And so by paying this kind of attention to our feet as we practice, I think we're being very consistent with those principles. So great. Anything else anyone's thinking of? Yeah.
My breathing changed too. I pay more attention to breathing during the practice and during the day too. And I try to breathe more with the upper parts of my lungs. And
oh,
also,
you mean?
Yeah. And then the back breathing, that was very interesting. And what she said, that we should pay a little bit more attention to breathing with the whole three-dimensional parts of our organs. And that stuck with me. And all this week, I could find myself focusing on my breathing a certain way and focusing more on moving with the inhalation and then letting things happen with exhalation.
Well, that's great to hear. I mean, that for me, these are the best reviews I could possibly get. Is I'm noticing my feet, my muscles are sore, you know, and I'm noticing all the different places I can breathe. That's, to me, that's it, because that goes with what I just said about, you know, if you make even a little bit of positive change in these things that we do so much of, which are moving around on our feet and breathing all the time, that's tremendous. And yeah, it does reveal though how frontist and bottomist, if that's a word, we are with our breath training. The places where we ask people to focus in the breath training we give them in yoga does either intentionally or unintentionally ignore what's going on up at the tops of the lungs, and to a large extent what's going on in the back. So yeah, that's a great thing to hear. So I'm really glad that you're connecting with all those breathing spaces, which are really important. Yeah. So how are we doing there? How you doing there, Laura Beth and Jennifer? Anything you'd like to toss in the ring here before we, Jennifer, I see you unmuted yourself. So
yeah, sure.
You go.
I unmuted. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I've been really, I'm still coming back to that mantra I think I shared with you of the find your feet, find your feet, find your feet, I don't remember which day, find your feet, get back to your feet. So I'm still kind of using that as a mantra in my own practice. And I've been noticing myself using it in my teaching as well. Like it just really, and I felt like, you know, it was really appropriate with the season change too, to have people grounding themselves. And I've been teaching outside. And so it's just been this like really easy, fun way to incorporate, you know, the concept of grounding, right? And really focusing on the feet and where's your weight balanced and what are you doing? So it's, you know, I'm still working on, you know, how I'm incorporating it into teaching, of course, but it's really, yeah, right.
That's great.
But it's become a nice focus for my practice. So I'm still using the mantra, and I'm still noticing how my kind of chronic pelvic imbalances and structural stuff that's been going on for a long time, as I'm able to kind of keep it a little more in check by continuing to make sure I'm grounding, you know, and working with my feet. So,
cool.
You know, it's been a process, and it will continue to be a process, but you know, when I'm reminded to focus on my feet, it helps with all of my chronic pelvic stuff. So that's nice.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you know, I think I mentioned the analogy of like going to your friend's house and seeing how crooked the roof is, and not going to the attic to see what's wrong, but going to the basement. Right. And that's absolutely true of, you know, when we have chronic pain, whether it's in the neck or the lower back or the pelvis, you can never go wrong by saying, okay, let's just see what's going on with the feet. And let's start there and see how sorting out our relationship with the earth informs and changes sometimes in really profound ways what's going on sort of upstream from there, particularly with the pelvis and the hips and the lower spine. So much of what goes on in those areas for people, which can often result in chronic pain, can be helped tremendously by sorting out the feet. When we say, you know, focus on the feet, or sorting out the feet, what we're really saying is, let's see what our relationship is like to being on this earth, you know? And we often use the word grounding in the general sense of, you know, we need to get more grounded and all of that. But in the literal sense of grounding, of having a pathway through your body that's clear for the weight of your body to find the earth. I mean, that's the very definition of alignment, right? and
Yes.
the foot is that transfer station of the down and then the up, the weight of our body channeling itself down through our feet to the earth, and the support of the earth rising up into our bodies. So it's a very potent conversation. So thank you for that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Lovely. And so I think, Laura Beth, you're unmuted, so let's go to you so we can hear from everyone.
Sure. So I think what has been sticking with me has been the sort of your big statement of that asanas don't have alignment, that people have alignment, and then also that practice of proprioception as we were finding our grounding in our feet. And I coming back to that in my own personal practice for this past week has been this. I guess what feels new is that using the proprioception to be like, okay, I know all of my alignment points, and instead of looking at my body to make sure I'm there, to like feel for myself where I really am in space and how I'm connected to the earth. And going through a practice that's a little more intentional and more slow than how I'm practicing as a result. Now, I haven't done the Warrior Series, so this will be new for me because I wasn't able to do that last week. So this is just how I've been embodying the practice this past week.
Cool. Well, do we have your permission then for Lydia to give you a little extra visual attention when we're practicing?
Sure.
Because that's her her job here, and she's very, very good at it. So yeah, great, lovely. Yeah. So yeah, the slowing down is an interesting thing, and you know, something else you said reminded me of this this principle, which I think I may have mentioned, of having to honor the way our brains process information when we're learning and teaching, and not getting too tied up in the sort of sequential way of processing information that that we must use when we're languaging something. You know, the parts of our brain that process language and logic and sequential this, then this, then this kinds of processes are very, very important, obviously. But when we're using language to convey a practice or to cue a practice, we have to be very attentive to the fact that the body exists all at once in 3 dimensions without parts. There are no parts to the body. We make parts with sharp instruments to create this thing we call anatomy, which the word itself literally means to cut up into pieces. That's what anatomy means. And then we name those pieces, and then it's very easy to get into this mindset of, you know, oh, we've got to take all these pieces and get them in some sort of relationship to each other in my practice, and then the way to do that is to sort of micromanage all my body parts with everything I've learned about the alignment points for the asanas. And that's the sort of way of thinking that I'm trying to challenge when I say something like, asanas don't have alignment. They don't even exist. You know, people exist, and they put their bodies in shapes, and we can look at a shape and say, oh, that's downward dog, or that's warrior 1 or warrior 2. Just like, you know, parts don't exist. Anatomically named structures don't actually exist as separate parts in a human body. You know, because when you go in there, all you're going to find are continuities. Everything's connected to everything else. Everything's in some way profoundly affecting everything else in the system. And in order for it to be a part, we will take a sharp instrument and cut away everything that we think isn't that part, and then we'll give it a name and start describing, you know, what it is and where it is and what it does. And I'm not saying that's not important. It's extremely important. We wouldn't have medicine if we didn't do that with bodies. We wouldn't have surgery. We wouldn't have all the amazing breakthroughs that have extended our lives and improved their quality over the centuries. And we need to understand the limitations of the part-oriented way of looking. And so the other way we process information, of course, is this sort of global, three-dimensional, all at once, everything is part of everything existing in simultaneous, inextricable connection to everything else. And unless we encourage that way of processing information when we're practicing by using imagery, by feeling the interior spaces and the three-dimensionality of those spaces through which the breath is moving, then we run the risk of having a very impoverished view of ourselves and our practice. So anyway, I'm sort of ranting a little bit about some of the things I'm passionate about. But this is on my mind because the other thing I'm doing today with the lights and the cameras and everything that's here is recording some of the introductory remarks I'll be making on the yoga channel of the embodiment conference, which is happening next month. So if you don't know about that, I'll make sure there's a link to all of that. You can sign up for free. It doesn't cost anything to sign up for it. It's going to be like 500,000 people around the world logging into this amazing thing. And we at yogaanatomy.net have become the yoga sponsors of the yoga channel in the embodiment conference. So I'm having to come up with some profound things to say in the introduction videos that I have to send them for the yoga channel. So these big picture issues have been on my mind, so to speak. So anything else before we get up and do some stuff? Are we good? Yeah?
Leslie, I'm wondering, since there's only a handful of people,
Yep.
Can they keep themselves unmuted while they're practicing so they can actually respond?
Yeah, if you don't get any weird audio feedback or anything like that,
Okay.
Sure. I'll invite you all to unmute yourselves so we can just be having conversations as we go along, which is awesome. That way, if we're out on our mats and we want to talk to each other, we can do it. Let me just test and make sure my other camera is working well here. And this is the camera that's showing my screen. So look, I have my projector and my screen here, just like we did in the room last week. Yeah. Can you all see that okay? Is the screen not too blown out?
No.
Perfect. Yeah. And I have a pointer. Look at that. Okay.
Still in speaker view, right, Les?
What's that?
You're still in speaker view, right?
I'm seeing now the other camera on the big screen, yes.
Okay.
And it's also, I think I'm also, cancel the spotlight video. Yeah, so now, yeah, speaker view. Did that change what you guys are seeing when I canceled the spotlight, or are you still seeing me in the large window? Still there?
Seeing the big picture.
Yeah, see, and now you're speaking and I'm seeing you. Excellent. Lydia, can you test the speaker view from your end? Lydia, yep. Can you just say something and test the speaker view from your end?
I am speaking.
Yeah, and now I'm seeing you on the big screen. Excellent. Okay. So this will be like an actual conversation and the video feed will reflect that. Awesome. Yeah, you can't do that with a super big group, but let's enjoy the fact that we can do it with our group. Okay, so just as a review, and I'm very conscious of the fact that oops, that shouldn't even be there. Okay, let me get rid of that. So I'm very conscious of the fact that there will be people viewing this video who are being introduced to this material for the first time. So the very first thing I'd like to do is to review the underlying and literally structure of our feet. And now this this actually leads me to say a couple of things about what commonly gets taught or cued for alignment in standing. Now, I happen to agree with Mr. Iyengar and with the system he created that favors beginning the training and experience and teaching of asana with standing poses. I agree 100% that that's a great place to start. It's not the only place to start, but I like to start there because we are, as I've mentioned, the only true biped mammals on the planet. And when we're talking about the feet, we're talking about the parts of our body that have evolved specifically for the purpose of having a relationship with the earth. Now, a point of disagreement, however, with the system that Iyengar developed is that they talk about the 4 corners of the foot, and I talk about 3 points. Okay, and you can certainly make an anatomical case for 4 corners of the foot because the calcaneus is a pretty wide bone, and I happen to have a model of a foot here that I can be holding as I'm talking about. So I'm just going to grab that. So, so if I hold this up here to the camera, okay, and I'm just looking at how it's showing up on the screen, all right. So the calcaneus is a pretty wide bone, right? And when we look at its actual structure, okay, I can move it forward so the shadow of it is pretty much the same size as the image, right? It does present a somewhat squared off shape that's facing the earth. And so you can definitely make a case for there being an inner and an outer edge to it. But when you turn it this way, okay, and I hope this is clear on the camera, what we see is that, yes, it's kind of a squared off shape from one perspective, but when you look at the actual shape of the surface that rests on the earth, right? And if you put a foot on a flat surface, okay, and I have a surface here that I can use for this. If you put a foot on a flat surface, all right, is that showing up on the camera okay?
Yes.
Yeah, we'll see that there's really only 3 points that are making contact with that surface, okay? And yes, this is a curved shape, and although you can roll around on that calcaneus to the outer edge or the inner edge, okay, there will only be one place where the weight is most completely gathered because that is a curved surface. And then if we look at the front of the foot, we will see that there's this place here that we're just going to call that the base of the little toe, and this place here, which we're going to call the base of the big toe. All the other bony structure of the foot is arched away from the surface that it's on. And so in this model, I've actually taken some black marker and indicated where those points are. And so the most fundamental practice that we can do that will set us up for having a good connection to the earth when we're doing any standing, and all standing starts with samastiti, because that's the first thing we're going to do, would be to make sure we're able to connect with these 3 points, all right? And so I'm going to put this image here up on the screen because that shows one possible way that we can circulate our awareness and our weight around these 3 points. So I'm going to come over here, and I think it might be better if I just exposed my lower legs here. Okay, there we are. So is that showing up adequately on the camera? Yeah, okay, I'm seeing it on the screen. All right, so now I'm going to invite you to come up onto your mats and just do this along with me. Okay. So from a starting point of the feet close together, all right. So I'm bringing my feet together, and I can actually touch the inner edges of my feet together. Some people can't because their knees hit first, but if you're following along with me, however close you can get your feet is where we're going to start. Because from there, what I'm going to invite you to try with your eyes closed, so you're not using visual feedback, is to separate your feet so that it feels like your heels are centered under your sitting bones. So wherever you imagine your sitting bones to be, and if you want to kind of reach back and find them with your hands, if you're not sure, that's okay, because it's those bony bumps you sit on where your hamstrings attach, the ischial tuberosities, or sometimes people just say sits bones. So notice if you're having to resist an impulse to look down at the floor to accomplish this. Although there's nothing on the floor that tells you where your sitting bones are, this is an internal proprioceptive process, right? And there's no wrong answer to it. Because I asked you to place your heels so that they feel like they're under your sitting bones. I didn't say place your heels precisely 7.25 inches apart. See, that you can get wrong. You'll either be exactly 7.25 inches apart or not, right? But that's not what we're trying to do here. It's a feeling. And that's going to be just where we start this exploration of samastiti. I also didn't say, make sure your feet are parallel. I have not looked at my feet yet. I don't know if my feet are parallel. I just know that if I bend my knees a little bit and shift my weight around, that the place I have my feet actually is where the place that makes my knees the happiest. Or on some days, my knees aren't happy, they're just the least amount of miserable because I have old arthritic knees, right? So now, this is a technique. And the technique involves something that we call a V yoga. Desikachar would often say that without V yoga, there can be no yoga. Now we know yoga means to join together, as in yoking something together. V yoga is actually the opposite and complementary principle. It's when something that usually operates as a single thing can be demonstrated to actually have two or more components. So V means to divide, to discriminate one thing from another. The word viveka comes from that same root, right? So what we're going to do here is we're going to separate the movement of our awareness, our attention, from the movement of our weight. We're going to send our awareness in front of where the weight is. And let me show you how that's going to work. So standing evenly on both feet now, without more weight on one side than the other, okay? And that's part of what samastiti means, but not all of it. All right? I'd like you to send your awareness to one of your heels. It doesn't matter which one. So is your attention, is your focus settled in to one of your heels? Are you noticing there's a tendency for your weight to want to follow that? Can you have your weight actually evenly distributed with more awareness on one side than the other? So now allow your weight to follow your awareness into that heel. Okay, now, having done that, can you send your awareness over to the other foot, to the base of the big toe? Was there an almost involuntary physical movement of your body when you did that? Can you make that not happen? Can you just send your awareness there? And now allow your weight to travel to that point. Can I now send my awareness across the front of that foot to the base of the little toe? And then the weight arrives there. Can I now, without moving my weight, send my awareness into the heel on that foot? And then once the awareness arrives there, the weight comes in after. Now I'm becoming aware of the base of the big toe on the opposite foot. And then my weight will follow. Without moving my weight, I'm becoming aware of my awareness moving across the front of that foot and arriving at the base of the little toe, and then the weight follows. And now I'm feeling the next target, which is the heel of that foot, and then the weight arrives there. And so that's one complete circuit. It took a while. I was going pretty slowly because I was talking. Now, I want you to see if you can continue with that. You don't necessarily have to go as slowly as we just did the first time round, but we have to move slowly enough so that we can send our awareness and then the weight to each point. And it's circulating around in this sort of figure 8 or infinity loop kind of pathway. And as you're doing this, as you're circulating your awareness and then the weight into each of these points in turn, there's a few things that you can notice. Number one, what are the tips of your toes doing? The ends of your toes. Are they instinctively clutching down at the floor or flying up away from the floor? Can they be quiet? Can the tips of the toes be quiet? Another thing that you may have noticed right away is, are some of these points easier to find than others? And are they easier or harder to find with your awareness or your weight? For example, I may not have a great idea of where the little toe is on my right foot when I just send my awareness there, but then when I let the weight travel, does that clarify it for me? Or is it the other way around? Is it easier to be aware of it, but then when you move the weight, it's like, where is it landing? So that's something to notice. Is one of your feet in general just smarter at this than the other foot? That's pretty normal because that's true of our hands. Why wouldn't it be true of our feet to some extent? And finally, as you're continuing to circulate here, notice your knees. What are your knees doing right now? Are they straight? Are they locked? Are they unlocked? Are they bent? There's no right or wrong answer to what your knees should be doing here in terms of the technique, just that having noticed what you like to do with your knees, try something else. If they like to be really straight or even locked, unlock them or even bend them. If they like to be bent or unlocked, what happens when you straighten them more or try to lock them? Do your knees even lock? Not everyone's knees can really lock. But as you're playing with changing what your knees are up to, notice if that changes your ability to sense what's going on in your feet. Does having your knees in certain positions make it easier or harder to connect with what's going on in your feet? These are all things to notice. This is swadhyaya. This is proprioception. And so now we're finally ready for our first samastiti. This is the vinyasa for samastiti. It's a vinyasa for samastiti. It's not the only one. And what does that mean? That means now allow your weight to center and your awareness to spread out into all 3 points of both feet simultaneously. That is how we're going to define samastiti, not just equal weight from left to right, but equal distribution of weight in all 3 points of both feet. So that's one vinyasa for samastiti. Great. So feel free to move your feet around, move around a bit. And if you want to move around in an interesting way after having done this, try walking backwards a little bit, wherever you are, if you have room. Why walking backwards? Well, because we sort of were just practicing walking backwards in this pattern. When you're taking a step back, the first part of your foot that will encounter the floor behind you is probably going to be the ball of your foot. It's kind of hard to walk backwards any other way. It's kind of hard to get any of those other points to hit first, right? So notice that. Is walking backwards producing that same pattern as now we're moving around? Big toe, little toe, heel, opposite big toe, little toe, heel. Big toe, little toe, heel, opposite big toe, little toe, heel. That's what we were just doing. That's a pattern for walking backwards. So I'd like to just take a moment here before we reverse this and do sort of the opposite vinyasa for samastiti, and just see what you noticed. What feedback might you have? So anything at all? Some of you have done this before. So Laura Beth, did we do the, were you in class when we did this initially? Yeah, okay.
I was, yeah, for the Saturday.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so anything at all that you noticed? Because I asked you to say, okay, what's going on with my knees? Are the tips of my toes flying up or grabbing down? Is one foot smarter than the other? Are some points sort of hiding and hard to find? So what did you notice about any of that?
I really did not like locking my knees. I really
didn't like that.
No, and I think my go-to or my MO is to keep my knees slightly bent and my quads engaged most of the time, just to have so many lower issues in my life. And so to lock the knees all of a sudden just felt really, it felt constricting. It felt like I couldn't, or it felt like I was falling hard into each spot rather than gently moving, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Absolutely, it makes sense. And that's, a lot of people do feel similarly. Like, for example, I feel like I get a better connection to my feet when my knees are unlocked, slightly bent. First of all, they don't actually lock. My knees don't, especially my left knee. Doesn't have full range of motion in either direction. But I used to make the mistake of assuming that everyone was like me, and I would make this sort of bold, definitive statement when I was teaching this, like, if you unlock your knees, you will feel more connected to the earth. And I discovered that that is not actually true for everybody. Some people have exactly the opposite experience, that the straighter their knee, even with it locked, the more they can feel into these points. Did anyone notice that? Anyone in our little group here? Julia?
That is true for me, because I am a hyperextender and my knees and elbows can lock out, beyond the range of normal motion. But I did feel exactly what Laura Beth was saying, that then you feel like you're almost on stilts, and it's like the connection is so heavy, right? Yeah. And after I educated myself on more proper usage of my joints, I've always now, softened through them, and then I can kind of control them better. But yeah, if they were my natural stance, they would always be locked, and then I would feel the earth then a lot more through them. When they're bent, it has to be some work to connect to the ground through my feet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when we say, can you feel your feet better, you know, that's very open to interpretation, because for some people, the locking of the knees, what it does is it actually sort of, it's bracing your bones on each other, with the connective tissue holding the bones together, providing the stability and the positioning of those bones and joints, right? The muscles don't have that much extra that they need to do over that locked joint, right? And for many people, that is how they feel. They feel through their bones and connective tissue. Whereas when you ask them to unlock their knee, there's all of this muscular action and sensation and, you know, static almost that can obscure for them the feeling of the points in their foot. So it's very open to interpretation what we mean by feel your feet or feel the points in your feet. You know, for me, the sensation that's generated by the muscular action that's keeping my knee joint keeping the two bones that form my knee joint in relation to each other, actually is providing a lot of feedback all the way into my feet and all the way up past the knee that I recognize as the sensation I'm looking for, you know? So this is it's very much an interpretation of what position of your knee allows you to feel your feet better. It's not universal at all. What we do know though is the more movement that's required to keep your center of gravity in relation to your base of support, the less effective knee locking becomes, because it limits the amount of movement in the joints, so, you know, below and above the knee. So in a static situation, the more static the situation, the more effective the knee locking is for people. As soon as you introduce movement into the picture, as soon as the center of gravity is in motion and needs to, and we need to stabilize the relationship of our center of gravity to our base of support, that's where the muscles and all the actions of the muscles come into play, and having a locked knee joint doesn't work so well for that, right? But this is a fairly static exercise we were doing. You're not moving a lot. You can be moving mostly within your foot and do this exercise and not swaying around with your center of gravity too much. Yeah. Any other feedback about that or observations that are interesting? Yeah. We good? Are we good to go on? Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
It was easier to find the weight than to put awareness in the points of when I was moving. So after I put my weight under, for example, under my heel or under the big toe, then I could feel the awareness there. Like it was difficult for me to send awareness first.
Have that experience too, Magda.
Yeah, can you say something about that?
No.
Your video's off, honey. So just saying.
Because just so you understand,
there you go.
I'm watching you guys on this screen over here. So
yeah.
This is what I would look like if I kept my video on. Anyway, I think I don't have a very strong sense of what you call this awareness and your awareness someplace. I can pretend that I do, and that's all I do. I pretend, I imagine, not pretend. I imagine that I'm sending my awareness someplace, but really I don't feel anything until I get there.
So for you, the awareness and the physical movement of weight in your body have to be the same thing, because otherwise you're just imagining.
I think
that's
so,
very
but,
interesting.
I've got a lot of noise in my body because I'm very dense, and I've got a lot of thick connective tissue and a lot of scar tissue, and there's just a ton of fascia, so there's a lot of noise for nerve sensations to go through.
That's interesting. So, but is awareness, the way I'm describing it, synonymous with nerve sensation?
I can't be aware without my mind being engaged. And my mind cannot be engaged if my nervous system is not active.
Okay, so interesting. So I'm going to my experience to see what that would be like. So as I'm sitting here, without moving or doing anything, can I just become aware of my left big toe? Can I become aware of my right earlobe? Without a physical movement that makes that awareness move or happen.
But it's not physical movement that makes me, it's a conscious thinking of that thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like I can think of that thing.
Mm-hmm. And
so I have an intellectual awareness,
mm-hmm.
but I don't have a sensory awareness. You know what I mean? Like I know I have a right earlobe. I can imagine it. I can draw it, you know.
But can you let your consciousness settle into it without doing something physical?
My consciousness. I guess maybe I don't really understand what it means to have my consciousness settle into something.
Well, certainly we know that pain can do that. Pain can put you in a body part. Can put your focus in a body part to the exclusion of almost everything else if it's bad enough, right? And that's an event in the nervous system to some extent, right? So we know that a noxious sort of input from the nervous system can make us very aware of the physical location where that sensation is arising from. But can we move our awareness voluntarily just wherever we choose to put it without some event happening in that area that's triggering a nerve impulse?
I don't want this to become just the Lydia and Leslie show here, but I think we can discuss this later on over a glass of wine. But I think when I say that I'm talking about an intellectual event that happens, it's not necessarily a physical event that happens. And I'm imagining when you say put your consciousness there, it's this like other experience that's not my intellectual experience or my physical experience. I don't know. I think I'm gonna turn off my video again. You talked about
Wait, can I add?
Please. It's a very interesting question. Yeah.
Well, I have to add, I had a client the other day I was giving yoga nidra to, and he said during the body scan, he could not make the awareness connection, during the body scan.
I hate body scans.
What's that?
I hate being led through any kind of body scan. I can lead
I don't know if it's the same
body
thing.
Scan.
Really? I love it.
Myself through it
too.
But I'm not very good at, I don't go to classes. I don't like having someone else tell me how to move or do or thing or whatever. I just don't. I like doing things on my own. So.
But he seemed to have had the same issue in terms of, or not issue, whatever it is, but the same mindset, saying like he couldn't bring his awareness. He was having difficulty bringing his awareness to the body part. Like he couldn't
Could he
understand.
Could he think himself into each body part?
He was trying to, but he said I couldn't bring like the connection. I was like, were you able to connect, like think of the body part and go there? Like, and he said, I'm not, he's like, I don't think so. And I'm like, oh my goodness.
But what about if you just ask him to move? If you ask him to move the body part, that's different, right?
Yeah, he could do that.
Yeah.
So
I didn't know there was a difference in terms of actually thinking of the body part. If that's the awareness you're talking about, like Lydia was saying, the difference between an awareness, sensory awareness, or an intellectual awareness. I wasn't, is it two different things?
For me, it is. And
okay.
Then there's this, I am imagining that this consciousness is a whole other thing that I'm not, like, maybe I don't have access to.
You got plenty of consciousness.
you're not alone is what I'm saying. Because
don't
he was
feel
having
alone.
a challenging time.
I know there are people like me out there, which is why it's important for me to be around when teachers are being taught by Leslie, because I can always bring up like, hey, there are people like me in your room, and this is how I hear that, or that's how I take that, or, you know, like that.
Yeah, and don't take it for granted that someone can just say, oh, I'm becoming aware of the base of my left big toe right now without shifting my weight into it to actually create some sensation.
No, I will do things like if I'm trying to be obedient and lie down in Shavasana and be led through a body scan, I might do things like I might press that body part a little bit firmer into the ground, or I might imagine like tracing it with a, imagine there's a line being traced, like a visual thing, so I can follow the line or something. But I have to do something else to get there. I'm not very.
There you go. Well, the classic way of doing that sort of body part by body part induction to Shavasana is to tense and release each part in turn. To generate some movement, some sensation, and feel what that action is like, and then feel what it's like for that action to cease. And that's how I got into my body. My first Shavasana was exactly that. And I think prior to that, I would have had a very similar take on being asked to just become aware of a body part without moving it or touching it or having weight in it, So,
then for Magda or me, when you say put your consciousness into the base of your big toe and then move your weight there, I would have to actually move my weight there. I'd have to think about like, okay, I know where I'm going. I can see it. I imagine it, but I'm not feeling it. I don't have a sense of consciousness of it until I've actually moved into it.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Magda, we're on this one together.
Can I add one thing? I don't know if it's just in my brain, but I was more aware of the body part that I was leaving than the next one, because you said don't move to like the base of the big toe. So I was still putting like forcing myself to stay on the right heel. I was more aware of that part than the next one. And then I kind of allowed myself, when I found my weight under the big toe, I allowed myself to be aware of that part and forced myself to stay there until I was able to go to the next part. You know what I mean?
Interesting. We are so unique in the way we process information and respond to cueing. And I think I'm going to have to think really deeply about how I may want to adjust how I cue this particular exercise in light of this discussion. This is fascinating.
I'm sorry I never fessed up earlier, Leslie. When you started,
this is like a true confession. It's like,
well, when you started doing
as a teacher, I'm loving hearing this.
I know.
Started, and it was probably a year or more ago when you started having people imagine, put their consciousness there first and then move. I was like, oh fuck, like, but I never said anything. I'm sorry. I should have said something.
Wow. You live with someone 23 years and you just start learning some really fundamental things about them now. That's really fantastic. So shall we, I'd like to give a shot at the other direction, okay, which is this. Now the hours are going the other way. And let's see if I can language it in a way that includes the possibility of Lydia and Magda. And Magda, yeah, right? Okay, so let's come back to the mat. And I'm gonna do that same thing where I without using visual feedback, I'm just stepping my feet out wide enough so that my heels feel like they're under my sitting bones, okay? So here's an interesting question. If we're not always able to move our awareness to a body part and then let the weight travel there, how do you know where the weight is going? How do you pick a destination so that it arrives where you want it to be? It's an interesting question. So let's start the same way we started in the previous exercise, the previous vinyasa for samastiti, with, I'm going to speak in the first person right now. I'm settling my weight evenly between the right and left foot. So now I'm going to make a choice as to which side my weight is going to go to, and I'm going to let it go into the heel of one of my feet. Okay? So I become aware of the side that I'm going towards, and I let the weight arrive at that heel. Okay? So the pathway, however I imagine it, to get from where I am to where I want the weight to go next, is in this version of the exercise going to be along the outer edge of my foot. And I'm going to let my weight travel and then pause for a moment as it reaches the base of my little toe. Now I'm aware the next place I'm going to go is across the front of that foot. And that's where the weight is going to travel until it arrives at the base of my big toe on that foot. Now the next place where I want to send my weight is going to be the opposite heel, the heel on the other foot. So that pathway now is going to be the weight leaving one foot, traveling to the other, and arriving at the heel of the other foot. To get from there to the next point, the weight is going to have to travel along the outer edge of that foot, and it's going to travel there until it arrives at the base of my little toe. And then I have to become aware of this pathway that goes across the front of my foot, and the weight is going to travel that path until it arrives at the base of my big toe. It's going to pause there for a moment while I become aware of the next place where the weight is going to be sent, which is the opposite heel. So now the weight has to leave one foot, arrive in the other, and it's going to settle into that heel. And that's the pathway we're traveling now. We've done one complete circuit kind of slowly. I'll ask you to go at your own pace now. And what we want is the clarity of the weight pausing for a moment at each location. Heel, little toe, big toe, opposite heel, little toe, big toe. Can there be a moment of clarity of, yes, the weight has arrived there, before we proceed on through the pathway that leads to the next point? And as we're doing this, all those things that we can notice that we did on the other side would be, are some points harder to connect with than others? Is one foot a little more generally better at this than the other? What are the tips of my toes doing? Are they digging in or flying off the ground? And what are my knees doing? And can I make other choices with my knees that influence my ability to connect with these points? All of these are questions, all of these are inquiries that we can be engaging in while we do this little vinyasa. So now let's arrive at that place that we're calling samastiti, which is an equal amount of weight in all 3 points of both feet. So from now on, when I say samastiti, just remember that is what is meant. Samastiti equals equal weight in all 3 points of both feet. Okay. So I languaged it differently that time based on the conversation we had. How did that sit with y'all? Was it different? Was it better, worse, the same, easier, harder? Did you notice the difference in language?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
For me, it was easier.
Magda was easier? Yeah.
Do you hear me?
Less frustrating, because I wasn't specifically asking you to do something that you said, like, I don't do that. It's not how it works for me, right? Yeah.
It was kind of more natural, just to follow the weight, like to follow the weight with awareness.
Interesting. Yeah, because if you're sending your weight from one point to the next, you have to have a general idea of the direction you're going to go, before you start moving, right?
Yes.
And then it's just a matter of pausing at an arrival place before you move on to the next one. So Lydia, was that language a little more compatible with your, to your liking?
I can't answer that yet. I'd have to listen to it a few more times. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because I was on the fly just reevaluating everything I thought I knew would work about that little exercise. So I thank you.
I feel like it's in the genre of not telling people what to feel. I think it falls in there somewhere, but I can't quite find the words for it right now. So I'll have to think about that more.
Well, it may very well be, and I need to give it some more thought too, because it is a technique, right?
Right.
It's a very inquiry heavy technique, but it is a technique. The technique that I was suggesting, the V yoga, was the technique is seeing if you can separate your movements of awareness from your movements of weight. And where do we show up in relation to the request to do that, right? And maybe not everyone can, is an important thing to notice. So that would be something to notice about being asked to do that.
Or maybe some people describe that as they experience that as using their intellect, not a feeling. Like, I think about where I'm going next. I visualize, I know, I understand the anatomy, so I know where I'm going next. But that's my brain, that's my intellect.
Well, yeah, I think some of this may be semantics,
It may be semantics.
Yeah. It may be that what you're describing as thinking is what I was describing as moving your consciousness.
Could be.
Yeah. All right. Interesting.
Fascinating. I do
yes?
have one thing I wanted to mention. Something that I know that I had. Oh, I can turn my video back on. A while back, I realized that I had started doing this exercise using muscles that passed through my ankles, and this came up because I was buying a new pair of shoes, and the person thought that I was pronating, and Leslie was like, "Oh, what are you doing?" And I explained I was really working on the spirals that pass through the front, the transverse arch, and then he noticed I was doing it through my ankles. So all of a sudden it was a light bulb, and I was like, oh my goodness, I've completely trained myself out of using the intrinsic foot muscles. I was using the extrinsic foot muscles. And it was really tough for me to get back to the deeper, subtler muscles within. What it does, though, is it means that there's none of this swooping around stuff that happens, and there's none of the knee bending stuff that sometimes happens. So maybe
because it's
next
happening
time,
within the foot. It's not being imposed
yes.
on the foot by the
So
structures
it's
outside
much
the foot.
smaller. It's much
Yeah.
more frustrating at first
Mm.
because you don't have that much movement. Most of us, I think, don't have that much
Mm.
movement unless you're Amy Matthews and have, you know, you can move every single muscle in your foot independent of
Yeah.
the others. But I think the next time y'all do this, you might want to think about that and notice, am I swaying a lot, or are my knees wanting to bend when I go from foot to foot? So it's just particularly, like Julia said, that you're really hypermobile. So for someone like you in particular, you might have to really pull back from the tendency to express in a bigger way what is really a very subtle movement. So
it can be a subtle movement. For many people, feeling anything going on in their foot to any level of detail is going to be a subtle thing to connect with if they haven't paid attention to that sort of thing previously. And just to be clear, what Lydia was saying was that the spiraling through the foot as she was walking, ideally is a movement that's happening mostly within the structure of the foot. But what we noticed, that she was accomplishing it through moving her ankle, not the joints within her foot. And there's a lot of, you know, she's recovering from a foot surgery and she's had injuries and this and that. But, you know, in any case, it was like a light bulb. It was like, wow, I was definitely getting the weight to travel through these 3 points, but where is the movement coming from that was getting that to happen? It was coming from a bigger joint that, you know, is really outside of the smaller joints within the foot, where it can happen in a more subtle way. So yeah, that was a big light bulb. And I had to be walking behind her after she put on her new running shoes, and we were walking back to where we were staying to actually see what was going on there. So cool. So let's move on. I'm going to open this screen, the projector again, and let you see the next bit. This is the core of the Warrior series. Everything we add on to this in the way of additional asanas is built on top of this this core, right? And let me just slide this over. Look, my projector is a little off center here. Okay, and we're gonna talk about some of the details of getting into this stance, this warrior stance, and then we're going to talk about how we can keep finding that samastiti as we go through getting into the stance. As we start moving our center of gravity around over that base of support, the question arises again, can we maintain our samastiti as we do that? Can we maintain it as we start going into this range of motion with our arms and our spine and these bigger breath coordinated movements? And then we'll have a chance to see, okay, if we can do that, let's challenge it. Let's systematically challenge our ability to stay connected with our feet by adding, you know, another warrior, by coming from there into a triangle, by coming from there into a revolved triangle, and by coming from there into a third warrior. So that's basically the idea. It's a progressive series of challenges to the samastiti. It's also a progressive series of challenges to our ability to keep our movements integrated with our breathing. So it's a interesting way to look at this. So to just be clear about the stance that we're taking, okay? Remember when we started that whole samastiti thing, I said we're going to start with the feet together and then separate them. So we basically went from here to here in that stance. So the stance we're taking in warrior is based on this spacing of the feet. It's based on the samastiti, not the sort of closer tadasana spacing. It's also based on a shorter step. Okay? The more classical alignment for a warrior is to take a bigger step and have the front heel more or less bisecting the back arch. Of course, depending on which warrior you're in, that placement will be a little bit different. What we're going to do is we're going to step into a stance that we don't have to change, regardless of whether we're doing warrior 1 or warrior two, or triangle, or revolved triangle, or Parshvattanasana. The feet don't have to move because we're not squaring the pelvis. You will not hear me ask you to do that, ever, okay? We are abandoning the squaring of the pelvis because we're going to honor the definition of healthy movement as well distributed, a little bit of movement from a lot of places, by asking that movement to the front or to the side that we are doing when we're going into warrior one versus warrior two, to ask for all of that movement to come from just the pelvis is sort of the opposite of a healthy movement, because you're asking too much movement from too few places. And if you repeat that too many times, you're going to have a repetitive stress kind of injury. So the opposite of that is what healthy movement is. It's a little bit of movement that comes from a lot of places and repeated a reasonable number of times. You can overdo even a healthy movement and have a negative result. So unhealthy movement, too much movement from too few places, repeated too many times. Opposite, exact opposite, is a little bit of movement from a lot of places, repeated a reasonable number of times. And that's what we're going to do now. So we're going to start with this step into the warrior stance. So we're back now, and I'm going to invite you to start at the back of your mat, okay? So we're going to be stepping forward. So I'm going through all those steps I just did to find my samastiti. I am making sure all 3 points of both feet are accessible and that I can balance my weight evenly on all 6 of those points at the same time, right? And this is, you're never really, no matter how advanced you feel you're getting in your practice, that doesn't mean you're excused from doing this every single time you get up on your mat and stand on it, because the body changes from day to day. And if for whatever reason on a certain day, one of these points is starting to hide out there and I can't find it, I need to know that, because that's going to tell me I need to back off a little bit and get my foundation sorted out, okay? If you're building a house, you can never, ever be excused from starting with the foundation. Okay, you can't start decorating the windows before your foundation is sorted out. So from this samastiti stance, I'm going to lift the front of one of my feet off the ground, pivot on that heel, and drop the foot back down after having turned it out to the side just a bit. And I know just a bit is not very exact language, but that's enough for now. What I've done now is I've established which is going to be my back leg. And now I'm going to step forward with my other foot. And as I'm stepping forward, I'm preserving that spacing of my heels. My heels are still under my sitting bones. I have not narrowed my stance, okay? My heels are still sitting bone distance apart. And I'm going to check every time I take that step to make sure I can get out of it with just my leg strength, okay? If I go a little bit too far, I need to create momentum with my upper body to step back. That I don't want that. I want that step to be recoverable with just my leg strength. Now, if I'm going to turn towards the front of my mat to do warrior one, I want to turn from my sternum. I want to initiate or start that turn from here and let it trickle down through all those joints in my spine and my rib cage and my organs and my lungs. Okay, and it will arrive in my pelvis. My pelvis will participate in that turning action to some extent. It's just not all of it is coming from there. So having arranged myself in this beginning place for warrior, I'm going to keep asking myself, where's my samastiti? Can I find all 3 points of both feet? And notice, you may want to experiment for yourself. If I try to crank my pelvis just a little bit too much into this position of facing front, that's going to have a very high likelihood of compromising my ability to stay connected with those 3 points in the back foot, in particular, the little toe point of the back foot. And that also feels like the inner arch collapsing downward. So I don't want to be cranking my pelvis so hard that I lose my samastiti. Always honor the base of support and don't do anything that compromises it. If I'm able to maintain my samastiti in this stance, I'm going to start bending and unbending my front knee. just to make sure that as I start moving in this vinyasa, I can do so again without compromising my base of support. Even though it feels like my weight is coming more into my front foot because my pelvis is moving in that direction, that doesn't mean I have to lose my samasthiti in the back foot. There's a counter reach that I can accomplish in that back leg that keeps it grounded. So if I can do that now without losing my samasthiti, I can add the range of motion of my arms and my spine and link it with my breath. And to make sure my head and neck are joining in that range of motion, I'm using a gaze, I'm using a drishti. I'm looking up to where my hands are with the tip of my nose. And then I'm looking down to where my hands are down here with the tip of my nose. So I'm guiding my gaze with the tip of my nose. So these cues you've heard so far of initiating movements with the sternum, of maintaining the samasthiti first and foremost, initiating with the sternum, and directing the gaze with the tip of the nose, these are the basic cues that will let us get into and out of most of these poses. If I'm able to maintain my stability in this movement, I'm ready to add the next movement. It's another breath added to the vinyasa, where I release forward and down over that front bent leg. I'm letting my neck and head release as well. My arms are behind me with the backs of my hands resting on my sacrum. And then the inhale takes me back up into that warrior one. And then the exhale brings me back to where I started. So now this has become a 2-breath vinyasa. Each inhale in this 2-breath cycle arrives me in that warrior one shape. One of the exhales arrives me here. I call this Parshva Utkatasana, actually. And then the other exhale brings me back to the starting position. So continue with that for a few more cycles. And just look and see what you guys are up to. Any feedback there, Lydia, that they all seem to be moving quite nicely there. They've been well trained.
I'm just thinking about Bhaskagram and that,
base of support, center of gravity, range of motion.
And that maybe sometimes the tendency is to go a little bit further into the movement than your base of support can maintain.
Well, that's why BOS, B-O-S, base of support, is the very first thing in that formula. So now after your next inhale, let's just stay in that shape, in the warrior one shape. This is where a spherical kind of an image is very useful, in the sense that I can imagine my arms are cradling a big sphere, like a balloon, like a soap bubble. So it's a round, 3-dimensional shape. But I'm also getting that spherical feeling in my torso, in my breathing spaces. And that will inform the positioning of my arms. If I pinch my shoulder blades too far back, I'm cutting off the back of my sphere. If I'm bringing them too far forward, I'm losing the front of my breath. If they're reaching up too high, then I'm losing the top of my breath. So that's that 3-dimensional feeling. And now, just for a moment of rest, I'm straightening my front knee and lowering my arms. So we can move along now to adding some of the other asanas to the sequence. So I'm going to now raise my arms so they're parallel to the floor. My front knee is bent. And now I'm going to, again, initiating with my sternum, I'm going to lift my sternum up and let that spiral spread all the way out through my collarbones and my arms and the palms of my hands. They're all lifting up. And then my sternum is going to drop down and everything's going to spiral the other way, including my gaze. So I'm gazing up towards the sky with my tip of my nose and my sternum. And then I'm gazing down towards the floor.
I sometimes just describe this movement as being like a tiny little cobra. So it's a cobra that just goes from kind of where your spine behind your sternum up to your head.
It's flexion and extension of the upper spine. Yes. So now on one of those upward spirals, I'm going to stay lifted through my sternum all the way out through my elbows. And then from the elbows down, I'm going to spiral the palms of my hands the other way. This is a double spiral in the arms. Now I'm directing my gaze, meaning I'm pointing the tip of my nose towards the fingertips of the hand that's on my back leg side. Then my sternum is going to continue looking around in the direction of the back leg. So now that's the movement that takes me into that warrior two shape. Again, it's starting at the sternum and trickling down through my spine, my rib cage, and it will arrive eventually at the pelvis. Now, the front foot can probably use a little extra attention in terms of those 3 points, especially the little toe side. So can I organize the weight in my front foot so I have samastiti there? And that will inform where my knee wants to be over that foot. Then, after I've done that, I can turn my gaze to look down that front arm, which is the more standard way of doing this pose. And now I can drop my back arm behind me, turn my front palm up. This is a lateral movement of the spine that brings that hand down to about the fingertips go to about the middle of that front shin, no further, and the tip of my nose is gazing directly at my front big toe. The sternum is actually gazing in the opposite direction. If I had an eye in my sternum, that eye would want to be lifting up to so it could see the sky. Checking in with my samastiti, I want to have that connection to all 3 points in both feet. And now from my lower belly, from below my navel, I'm going to start an exhale and use that to extend my front knee. It's going to lift my center of gravity up and back just a little bit when that happens. For many people, this is the best, safest place they can be in a triangle because it actually releases the top side of the neck. But to complete the full expression of the pose, I can bring that top arm down so my palms are touching. And then my drishti, my gaze, is now attaching itself to the fingertips of that top hand. And I'm not putting that hand where the tip of the nose can't follow it. They're moving together in sync. They're integrated. And I'm going to soften that front knee now as I bring that hand down, and the other hand as well. Both hands now are released alongside that front foot. I'm releasing the back of my neck, so the weight of my head is fully released off the top of my spine. Where's my samastiti? Have I allowed all of my body weight to fall into that front foot? How do I stay anchored in my back foot? Okay. I'm bending that front knee a bit now as I lift my torso up, and I'm sending now the opposite hand across to that front shin. It can be on the outside or the inside of the shin, doesn't matter much, but the fingertips shouldn't be any lower than the middle of the shin. And I'm taking that top arm and tucking it in behind me. Here you want to be attentive to the tendency to brace your arms against your leg and your pelvis, and use your shoulder girdle to crank on your spine. We want to avoid that. The arms are just resting in place, and they're not initiating this action. So the tip of my nose is gazing down towards the front big toe. The sternum is lifting up. It wants to see the sky. It's lifting around in the other direction to see the sky, because this is the revolve triangle. Where's the 3 points in both my feet?
Magda, you might want to try your hand on the inside of your knee.
Yeah, the lower hand can be on the inside of the knee. It doesn't need to, if you have to crank it to get it to the outer side of the shin, don't bother. So now, again, from my lower belly, I'm going to exhale and let that raise my center of gravity up and back as the front knee extends. And then I'm going to take that top arm, palms together, and slowly, without losing my base of support, I'm going to lift that hand up, following the tips of the fingers with the tip of my nose. This is the revolve triangle. Now I'm going to come around, drop that hand, both hands now released alongside the front foot, releasing my neck. This is an inversion for the spine, for the breath. It's a bit of a rest pose. It's also the place from which we can now contemplate the third warrior in this sequence. So I'm going to raise my back heel up. I'm going to come onto the 2 points in the front of that foot. Then I'm going to raise my torso up, placing both hands now behind me on my sacrum. This is a bit of proprioceptive awareness. I can't actually see that back leg at the moment, but I can feel where it is in space. And even though that back heel is off the ground, I can still reach back through it. I can still send energy out that heel point of that back leg. And from that angle and reach of the back leg, I want to match that angle with my spine, lift my sternum, and tuck my chin. This is axial extension. Now, if I need to stay here with that back foot on the floor to be stable, I'm going to do it. But if I can be stable and maintain that line, that connection between my back leg and my spine, and bring the weight over my front foot, then I've got warrior 3. I can play with different arm positions, arms back, arms side, arms front, arms in namaste, whatever works. And then dropping the back foot and lowering my arms. I can now turn my feet so the outer edges of my feet are more or less parallel. This is a wide stance for this forward fold. I inhale with the arms coming up, and then from my lower belly, I am exhaling, releasing forward and down. So this is a bit of a rest pose here. It's also an inversion. Let's not forget it's an inversion. Can you allow your breath to be upside down in this inversion? What would that look like? What would that feel like? It would feel like the circumference of your rib cage just releasing and opening so that your organs and your diaphragm can fall more deeply into the base of the rib cage in the direction of the head. And gravity favors that movement because you're inverted. Very nice. So from there, you can rise up, come back to an upright position, take your time with that, and bring the feet together. Return to your starting place of Samastiti. Okay, congratulations. You have completed exactly 1/2 of the Warrior Series. I hope you have some juice left for the second half, but for now, in the meantime, if you need to take a drink of water or move around a bit, feel free. Notice what you're feeling, notice what you're noticing. And certainly if there's any feedback you'd like to share or any questions you have, this would be a good time. And the more questions you ask, the more you can delay having to do the other side. Just saying. Okay. So anything there? Some of you are doing this, not for the first time. So I'm just curious what you've been noticing as you work this way.
So last weekend on the Saturday, we had done just the basic stance moving from Samasthiti forward and then moving through here, but that's all that we had done before Sunday, and I did most of it on Sunday. And I was feeling my practice from this morning because I did the leg heavy practice this morning. And then we're like holding up, and all of a sudden, I'm feeling the shaking in the muscles and stuff. And because I think that my stance in this way is different, I'm using the muscles differently. And so I was just feeling into all of that, feeling into the, I think the feet become so important at that point, because if you don't have that, then everything crumbles. So,
yes.
So that's what I kept coming back to. I had to.
Yeah, there's no way to do this without Samasthiti. And there's no way to do the Samasthiti as you're doing the sequence without your muscles getting really actively involved in all of those adjustments you need to do within your foot, from outside your foot. It's a very different kind of muscular strength as well, because keep in mind, some of the distinctive features of this as a vinyasa compared to the way vinyasa is usually practiced is, number one, we're taking a stance, we're placing our feet, and they stay there through the whole side of this sequence. And you're doing all these asanas, one after the other, on that one side with that same stance without having to move your feet. So that keeping your feet in place and moving your spine and your breath and everything over that base of support requires a very different kind of endurance sort of strength from those muscles, compared to the usual vinyasa is you do a salutation of some kind, you go into one pose on one side, you do another salutation, you go into the same pose on the other side, and then you move on to the next pose, right? Now, I'm not trying to say that one way is better than the other. They're just very different. And if you only ever do practice one way, you'll only develop one kind of strength. And we need all kinds of strength in our lives. And so this, for many people, provides what has become a very missing piece to their strength, to their muscular endurance, in particular, the strength and integration and isolation that's required of the muscles that support the arches of the feet. Really, really targets those in a very strong way, right? Which is why occasionally after doing this, you walk around and you're feeling these like stabbing pains in your foot, right? Yeah, Magda, because you said that, were you feeling that in that same thing in your feet now as we were practicing? Because you said it was after, in between practice, you were getting it, right? Were you feeling any of that now?
No, it was just some randomly during the week, it would just happen.
Okay, yeah, it's just random. Yeah, and not a bad thing, not a bad thing. Okay, so any other questions? No?
I just wanted to offer, Danielle, it was interesting to me to observe that when Leslie was talking about the proprioception required, I guess I can start my video again. When the proprioception required for warrior 3, when your toes were on the ground, you were in what the position that we would call usually banana back. That is, you were kind of like your back
arching,
you're arching, your leg was here, and then your back was like that. And as soon as you lifted up off of it, and you lifted off of it beautifully with total control, it wasn't like you were using momentum, all of a sudden you straightened. So it was very interesting that you had difficulty finding your axial extension while your foot was on the ground, but as soon as your foot was off, I guess because it was more familiar or something, but you suddenly found axial extension. So it's something you might want to just play with a little bit while your foot's on the ground. It's a useful thing to know how to find wherever you are. So.
Yeah, because as I mentioned, that's a very proprioceptive moment there, where the only way to consider what angle to use for your spine is to sort of be able to feel the angle that your back leg is forming to the floor, which is not available through visual feedback. That's a pure moment of pure proprioception. Also, another distinctive feature to this sequence is that these poses we arrive in, although they may feel somewhat familiar, okay, because we're using the same names to describe them that you would in, say, an Iyengar class, where they're very different. But another difference is that for the most part, people are dropping down into these poses from above, right? You do triangle in most classes, all right, you're going to be here, you're going to be placing your feet, extending your legs, extending your arms, extending your spine, and then pivoting down here. I call it the prop and drop, right? So you're lowering into it from above. All of the asanas that we did in this sequence, you have lifted into them from below. That's a very different kind of strength that's required, and it's a very different set of actions that arrive you into that shape, and those actions will still be present once you're in the shape, you know. And the actions that get you into the shape when you're doing that are the ones that sustain you in a healthy way when you're there. Prop and drop, frequently what that turns into is, okay, I'm in the shape, now I have to work on my alignment. Now I have to work on getting my kneecaps to lift, or my skin to turn this way, or my whatever it is. And the thing we like to say is, if once you arrive in an asana, you have to correct your alignment once you're there, it's probably a good idea to reconsider how you got there in the first place. The actions that arrive you in a shape should be the ones that sustain you there in a safe way from that point of view, right? So something to think of. All right. So let's do the other side. I'm gonna shift cameras again. Okay, you ready? All right. Can I roll my pants down? Have you all seen enough of my hairy legs at this point? I have. Okay. I have to take a moment to remember which side I did. So I'm stepping into my samastiti, heels under my sitting bones. Where's the 3 points in my feet? I'm gonna need them. Okay. And I'm gonna lift the front of my other foot now and turn it a bit to the side, making sure that I can get all 3 of those points engaged with the floor, with the earth. And then I'm gonna take my step forward, maintaining that sitting bone spacing between my heels, making sure I can get out of that step with just my leg strength. And the size of this step will vary from day to day and from side to side on the same person. You know, it's something we always need to functionally check, and not just rely on our existing muscle memory to put us somewhere, because circumstances very well can change, and we need to perceive the reality of that and then accommodate it. So again, what's happening here as I turn towards the front of my mat is I'm initiating that from my sternum and letting it just cascade down through all of these joints and arrive at the pelvis in a way that doesn't destabilize my base of support. I want to make sure that as I bend and straighten that knee, that I'm not losing any of my points in my feet. And notice, here's another thing, I don't specify which side to start with. I never do. I always let you choose. And then I let you contemplate, why did I choose that side? Was it on purpose? Was it just instinctual? Did I just sort of automatically step into my easy warrior stance first? Is this my more difficult warrior stance? Am I having a little bit more trouble finding and or maintaining my samastiti on this side compared to the other? So these are all very sort of potent inquiries, swadhyaya, that we can do. Okay? If I'm able to maintain my samastiti in this movement, then I am probably ready to try this range of motion. So I first establish my base of support, then I move my center of gravity in relation to that base of support. Now I'm adding this range of motion in the spine and my arms and my breath, linking all of that together. And if this is something that I can be stable with, I'm then going to add the next breath that brings me forward and down, and then back up again in that warrior shape, and then to this beginning. This is the core vinyasa of the warrior series. And I'm not really counting to make sure I do exactly the same number of these that I did on the other side. I'm just going with what my body is telling me. How much juice do I have left, knowing now what's coming for the rest of the sequence. But what I am going to do is, after one of these inhales, I am going to pause. I am going to breathe in that shape of that warrior one. I'm going to think of this spherical nature of my breath and keep all three dimensions of the breath as open as possible based on my arm position. It may help to also imagine I'm encircling this large soap bubble with my arms. So that's reflective of that three-dimensional nature of my breath as well. And just a bit of a rest moment as the arms release down and the front leg straightens. Next, preparation for warrior two. The front knee bends, the arms are now extended out to the sides, and sternum once more is initiating. It drops and everything spirals down with it. It lifts and everything spirals up, but it all begins with the sternum. As Lydia said earlier, if you think of this as a tiny little baby cobra that's happening at the top of the spine, that can help encourage the articulation of those top ribs, which connect to the sternum. After my next inhale, I'm staying lifted in the sternum all the way out through my arms, but now from my elbows down, I'm turning my palms down. So that's the double spiral I've wrapped into my arms here. And now my gaze, the tip of my nose, is pointed out at the fingertips on the back leg side. And then my sternum continues around in the direction of the back leg. So I'm looking straight down my back arm here, and I'm sending my awareness now into my front foot, feeling all 3 points there, making sure especially that little toe is engaged and seeing how my knee wants to be over that foot once I organize it. Once I've done that, I can turn my gaze toward the front hand for the warrior two. Few breaths here without losing the dimensionality of my breathing. I'm bringing my back arm now behind me, tucking it in. The front palm turns upward. This lateral movement of the spine now brings that front hand down to the middle of the shin. My gaze is at the front big toe. The tip of my nose is pointing at it, but the sternum wants to see the sky. Again, I'm avoiding pressing my arms into my body so I can crank with my arms. This is unfolding from the core of my body as I initiate with my sternum. Having done that now, I can take an exhale that originates below my navel, and as I exhale that way, I'm letting my front knee straighten and my center of gravity rise up. I'm lifting into this from below. I'm now taking that top arm down so the palms touch for a moment, and then I'm passing off the gaze to that top hand, following the tips of the fingers with the tip of my nose. This is the Trikonasana. And now the arm can circle back down towards the floor, maintaining my samastiti in both feet. Both hands are released alongside that front foot. I want to make sure I'm not holding any tension in my neck, letting my head just fall into this flexion along with my spine. And I'm going to bend my front knee a bit, lift my torso up enough so that I can bring now my opposite hand across to that front knee. This is setting up for revolved triangle. The hand can be on the inside of the shin or the outside. It doesn't matter as long as the fingertips don't wander further down than the middle of the shin. The other arm is going to wrap behind me once again. And now, as my sternum wants to see the sky, the tip of my nose wants to keep seeing my front big toe. And I'm finding the 3 points in my feet. I really need them here. I really need my samastiti. Front knee is still a bit bent. So now, from my exhale in my lower belly, I can straighten that front knee to open up the base and raise my center of gravity. Next, the top hand comes down and my gaze is being passed off onto that top hand. I'm tracking it with the tip of my nose, not putting the hand where my nose can't follow. Revolved triangle. And I'm coming down once more into Parshvattanasana. It's an inversion, it's a flexion, it's a release. The final warrior is here. So I first raise my back heel, putting the weight on the 2 points in the front of my back foot. And from there I raise up. I've lost sight of my back leg now, so I have to feel where it is. And I have to feel my way into that back heel. Even though it's off the ground, I'm still extending energy out that heel so that point doesn't get lost. And now I'm tucking my chin as my sternum lifts. That's axial extension. I want to maintain the integrity of that line through my back leg all the way out the crown of my head. If I can do that and shift the weight onto that front foot, I've got warrior three. I can play with my arm position, back, side, front. Namaste, whatever works. And I release. Arms to my side. I'm turning now so my feet are facing the same way, wide stance. Deep breath and release. Into that forward fold, wide stance, forward fold. We call that Prasrita Padottanasana. Again, this is an inversion. Can we open the base of the rib cage to accept gravity's movement of our organs and diaphragm in the direction of our head? That way we ensure that the breathing is upside down along with the body. Okay, so now I'm going to come back up and return to the beginning. Everything resolves back to samastiti, but in truth, it's never left samastiti. Just feel notice your body, notice your breath in this position. This is where you are welcome to contemplate, visualize, plan for what comes next for you. I always insert a moment of free form counterposing at this point so that you can take care of you based on what you're feeling inside of yourself. This is not for me to figure out somehow through the magic of my omniscience what is going to work best for you right now. So it's a question, really. What do I need right now? I usually like to take the weight off my feet and put them in the air or something like that, or to do a back bend sometimes feels better, or some days a twisting movement seems in order. It all depends. But the only one who can really determine that is you. So let's take a couple more minutes for that, or if you need to visit the bathroom or take a drink or whatever it is that's required for you to tend to your needs, this is the time to do that. Okay, we're getting a little noise here. I'm just muting everyone for now, and then we can unmute as we share. So I'm asking Lydia here to unmute to start with. Hello, and maybe can we see you? So any general or specific observations that you made during that you would care to share? Lydia?
Well, first off, Danielle's found her axial extension very easily, it seemed, and as soon as she raised her back heel, which I would wager a guess meant that she maintained her samastiti even as her heel was up. So even though the back point was not actually on the ground, that the sense of samastiti remained. And that's why I think axial extension could express itself.
Well, that's interesting, because structurally, kinesiology, whatever you want to say, if you're on the 2 points of your back foot, but lose connection with the heel, it feels a little bit like it's pushing you into a back bend sometimes, right? And so sometimes just that one bit of awareness of, ooh, maybe I can reach back into that heel, which lengthens a little bit more, that entire back line of the body, can sometimes give us that feeling of finding the axial extension. You know? And I'm generalizing here, of course, it's different for everybody, but I've seen that at work, and I think that may be a little bit of what you were observing, perhaps.
How'd that feel, Danielle?
Yeah, I actually concentrated more so on a diagonal line from crown to the foot. So a little bit better. I got a little distracted. My daughter came home, so I was trying to catch up and get with everybody. But the diagonal, I concentrated on the diagonal line. You were saying the banana, so I was trying to kind of avoid that.
Well, you managed to make a good correction, so there you go.
Thank you.
Nothing wrong with bananas. We love bananas, but you know, that's just how we describe that sort of arching thing that can happen. Yeah. And this is where, you know, this is where a little bit of awareness of the anatomical descriptions of ranges of motion of the spine and the language you use around that can be useful. Because when I say axial extension, sometimes that, you know, people don't know that's I'm saying the same thing that some teachers mean when they say lengthen your spine, right? Like actively lengthen your spine. I find that cue to be a little less specific, and it can mean so many different things to different people. So I tend to use the technical terms a little bit more in that sense, even though I tend to shy away from technical language in general. But using that language of the spine, what I can point out about this sequence is that we did all the available ranges of motion to the spine at some point. Extension, flexion, lateral flexion, axial rotation, which is another way of saying twisting, axial extension, which is flattening all three curves of your spine simultaneously, which involves, by definition, the actions we like to call bandha, and the breathing pattern that arises from that, and inversion. There were times when we were upside down in the Parshvattanasana and in the Prasvita Padottanasana, right? So all of those possibilities for the spine are actually happening over that steady, stable base. So the base, the feet, the legs, and to a large extent the pelvis, because we're not cranking it around so much by not squaring the hips. That's sthira. That's the sthira, stable aspect of the body in this sequence. And the sukha, the movement, the space, the freedom that's being explored in the spine, in the breath, in the arms, in the gaze, all of that. In other words, what's happening above the base, what can happen above the base with more freedom of expression, because the base is maintained as a stable foundation, is all of this, the sukha. And that's flexion, extension, lateral flexion, axial rotation, axial extension, all of those nice things, all of which is happening without any body weight being put into your hands. We're not asking you to do a bunch of chaturanga, up dog, down dog combinations to get you from one pose to the next. So there's that added benefit for people who have issues with holding up weight on their hands and wrists. So, yay. I'm getting to say so many warriorish stuff here in this. This is great. I'm pulling out all of my distinctions about what this sequence can do. I don't know if I got to say all of these things really last weekend, so I'm relishing the opportunity here. So anything else? Anything else you noticed? Yeah.
I was just going to ask Julia if you can remember, we were all a little bit sad that the recording didn't take last week, but you were particularly sad because there was some great conversation. Do you remember any of the other comments or questions that came up that you might want to
actually.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that. There was one good conversation around the modification, and there was another conversation around bone density. I'm losing the English word for
osteoporosis
osteoporosis.
and flexion. And flexion.
Yeah, flexion for osteoporosis.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure to have to go over the basics of what got said there, because I think it's very important. So, and this comes up pretty much every time I teach something like this, where I'm actually encouraging the spine to go into flexion, and that sets off alarms for some people because they have been taught not to teach flexion to people who have bone density issues. And aside from the bone density issues, in general, for humans who have spines and discs, we have been told that we should be very cautious about flexion because it has the potential for damaging your lumbar discs, because it causes the nucleus of the disc to be propelled to the back of the disc, which is where it most frequently bulges, protrudes, extrudes, all those flavors of degenerative disc damage. So that's what sort of led into that conversation, right? And I had some opinions on all of that. So I believe one of the first things I said, and this is back to the osteoporosis issue, is I know a lot of people who are, medical authorities and so on, who are very willing to cite the risks to people with severe bone density issues in flexion. And those risks are real, and those people exist. And you can get to a point with your bones in general and your vertebra in particular, where the trabecular structure, the inner structure of the bone, has become so weakened, so decalcified, that yes, in a flexion movement, you can risk creating one of these fractures, which turns the vertebra from like a box shape into a wedge shape. So the percentage of people who are that fragile in their bones, percentage of people with that diagnosis of osteoporosis who are that fragile, is always a pretty small percentage, right? But they're at the highest risk. And the likelihood that someone who's that fragile will have a fracture at some point, whether in a yoga class or not, is that, well, they're probably going to experience more potentially damaging stress on their spine if they cough or sneeze really hard, or if they're on the toilet like this trying to squeeze out a poop. They often give people laxatives who have bone density issues to prevent them from squeezing and pushing, because that's a known risk as well, right? So is it possible that someone at that level of risk who has that diagnosis in a yoga class could be doing flexion and damage their spine? Absolutely. I would be foolish to say that it doesn't happen or couldn't happen. It could. And we have to evaluate the potential risk to everyone else with that diagnosis who's not at that level of weakness, to being coached into not doing flexion at all, period, because it could damage your spine. What's the risk to those people who are in all good faith following the advice of their doctors and the yoga people who have been told by the doctors that it's not worth the risk to do flexion at all? What is the potential negative that can result for them? Well, you don't have to answer that theoretically, okay? And I would encourage nobody to take my word for it or anyone else's word for it, but to have a direct experience of what it is like to go through even a single day of your life avoiding all flexion of your spine, with the added fear installed in your mind and body and emotions that if you do flexion, you could damage your spine. What is it like to live your life in that state for even one day? And that's exactly what I ask people to do who are willing to give that advice to another human being. Before you give someone else that advice, take it. Take your own advice and live a day of your life following that advice and see how you feel. See what state your mind, your breath, your adrenals, your digestion will be in at the end of one day living without flexion, which is a natural movement of the spine. It will, for many people, fire up their adrenals. It will put them in a state of chronic low-grade sympathetic arousal, which is that fear-based, thing. And that shuts down your digestion, which, by the way, prevents you from fully absorbing the calcium you so desperately need to have in your bones. Additionally, we need to recognize, and this is a bit of science, that bones, in order to absorb calcium, assuming it's available and that you're assimilating and digesting it, in order for that calcium to be deposited in your bones, those bones have to be experiencing healthy weight bearing. Unhealthy weight bearing, everyone should avoid, Unhealthy weight bearing looks like flexing at your spine, reaching out in front of you, grabbing something heavy and lifting it that way. That is a loaded flexion in the spine, which nobody should do. That's just bad lifting technique. But an unloaded flexion where you're just moving gently with attentiveness, with consciousness, with sensitivity to your breath. In other words, allowing your body to fully breathe into this position and breathe into the position that takes you out of it. That can't be anything but useful and helpful to the vast majority of people in general and those that have that diagnosis. So it's a bit of a soapbox issue for me, because there's a lot of fear mongering that goes on in all good faith, really, with the best of intentions, I'm assuming. But unless you're willing to practice what you preach, unless you're willing to do that, don't tell someone else to do it. Don't tell someone else to avoid a completely natural movement of their spine called flexion. And we have to stop being hysterical about our discs. Degenerative disc disease is now, amongst researchers and clinicians, not being referred to as a disease at all. Because if it happens to everybody as a natural consequence of aging and moving through your life on a planet with gravity, then it's not a disease. It's called normal wear and tear. And study after study after study of non-symptomatic people who have no back pain at all, but who nevertheless are given MRIs, because why would you ever get an MRI if you don't have back pain, right? Someone needs to study these people. Someone needs to look at their discs and see what those discs look like. Those are people who would never get MRIs because they have no pain. So, but when you do give them MRIs and you see the kinds of disc damage that exist in these pain-free bodies, you begin to realize that it's just there for pretty much everyone. And if you have back pain, you're going to get an MRI and you're going to find something probably. So the correlation, not the causation, but the correlation between the finding of degenerative disc disease and back pain is that people with back pain are the ones getting MRIs. You give MRIs to people without back pain, you find the majority of them have the same stuff. They have bulging, protruding, extruding discs with no pain. So we need a better explanation of why people get into pain that doesn't blame it on the normal wear and tear that you'll find in their discs if you happen to give them an imaging study. So those are also kind of soapbox issues for me.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think
the other item that was important that we mentioned last time was the use of props, and sometimes using props leads to more weight bearing on the hand rather than actually using, again, the musculature, when we're raising the floor to the hands. So
yeah, I'm gonna grab a yoga block from over here. We don't generally keep it out because we don't use it that much, so it's more of a relic. Actually, where is it? I don't think we even have it anymore. Honey, where's our yoga block? It's not. We don't even have one here. Anyway.
probably they're in the bathroom being used as.
Oh, that's right. I forgot. I totally forgot what we started using our yoga blocks
my
for.
poor man's version of squatty potty is I use the yoga blocks. So y'all know what a
Exactly.
squatty potty is?
Yep.
Squatty potty? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well.
Yeah. Well, they're clean. They're just, you know.
All right. Let me switch cameras. I totally forgot that's where they were.
That's
It's
where they live.
hysterical. All right. So, yeah. So, in fact, if you look at the illustration, this is the original drawing of this sequence, and this is like 30 years old now, this drawing. Okay, my original stick figures. You will see that I have actually drawn blocks into these poses for the setup for a revolved triangle, right? It's there in the drawing. It's archaic. Because I used to say, yeah, sure, if you want to use the block, it's fine. But what I was finding was, that when we come around here, you know, what we really want to do is work our feet and work our legs to steady us and support us, all right? And at this point in the sequence in particular, because things are getting a little fatigued, okay, there's a tendency, if a block is there, to just lean on it and turn it into part of your base of support. And I would see people doing that in class, you know, and they had this sort of white knuckled death grip on their block, and it was starting to wobble, and it was very clear that now they were propping their body weight off of their legs and feet where we wanted it and into the block. So I would just come around and kick that block away, you know, and say, hey, we want you to use your legs and feet, not the block. And so it just, it seems it's really, and you know, even without a block, people will they'll start doing this. They'll just prop, oh, I'm tired. And so now this is part of their base of support. And it's no longer putting the work that we really want into the legs and feet. So there's, you know, so that's just the thing about the blocks in that particular sequence. Now, I'm not saying I don't like blocks. I'm not against blocks. You know, I had this conversation in a workshop years ago, and, you know, I'm always fascinated to hear how I get quoted by people who have either.
We
You
can't
just
hear
lost
you
your
well.
audio.
Yeah, sorry. Am I back?
Yeah, you're still a little bit soft though.
The audio is soft?
Yeah. Maybe your battery's done.
I think maybe the battery in the earpiece is getting a little low. So I'm going to switch. Okay. I'm switching to the mic that's built into the camera. Is that better?
Yes.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Got to switch speakers now too. Okay. How's that? Are we better now?
Fine.
Okay.
We're
great.
fine.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so someone told me that they heard someone say that I said at some point that I don't like props, which is not true. What I had said was what I just related to you guys about, you know, the specific use of that particular prop in that particular sequence, which I found was counterproductive. And that got generalized into Kaminoff hates props, you know, which is dumb. Props are great if they're used intelligently, but, you know, a prop can also be like a crutch, you know. A crutch is a great thing. If you have a, you know, if you're in a cast or recovering from a surgery and you need a crutch, great. You don't keep using the crutch after you don't need it, right? So a prop can be a prop, but a prop can be a crutch. And I think it's just a question of how it's being used, not whether it's being used. You know, I have bolsters and straps and blocks and things like that, and I use them all the time, you know, to create some support or some lift or a reach that I can't do that I want to explore. I'm always telling people that they need to use blocks to do a jump through. If they have a long torso and short arms, how are you going to do a jump through unless you put something under your hands and raise the floor up? Because you're You're not gonna, your arms aren't gonna get any longer. You don't want your torso to get shorter. So you have to accommodate sometimes with the use of props. And props are great, obviously, for restorative work. It's a big part of restorative work, which can be extremely healing for people. It can also be extremely aggravating for people, And what the ironic thing is, the people for whom restorative work is most aggravating are probably the ones who need it the most, but are least able to do it, at least at first. If you have a type A who's like, nah, and they're just like, totally buzzing with nervous energy, you may think, oh, this person should really do a restorative class. But I'll tell you, most likely, if they try it, they're going to be the most miserable person in that class. What you've got to do is you got to meet someone where they're at the energy level that is somewhat compatible with their starting point. You have to do that. Only when people are met where they're at can they be taken to somewhere that's a little more difficult to get to. But you can't just take someone who's like running on adrenaline and they've got everything turned up to 11 and then take the knob and suddenly shift it down to 0. Doesn't work. My mother went to a restorative class once down in Florida. She loves going to yoga places and bragging about who her son is. Anyway, she went to this. She has had back pain on and off for years and has had a couple of surgeries on her back and this and that. She's fine now, but she's found that yoga can be very useful. And so she went to this new class, and she told me to this new studio, and she told me they had a class that she was going to try. It was a restorative class. And I was like, oh, just, I kind of know my mom a little bit. It's like, I really want to hear how that goes for you. And so the next day we spoke, and I asked her how the class was, and she went, oh, it was terrible. My back hurt so much more after that class. I'm like, really, what happened? Said they had me bending over and picking up the blankets and putting them here and moving the bolster over there, and I had to get the blocks and I had to get the strap and then the eye bags. And it's like with all of that schlepping of the props, it was like my back was just, it hurt so much more afterwards. And clearly she found the whole thing annoying. So that was my mom in restorative. You have to meet people where they're at. Yeah. Anyway. So, wow, look at that. I can't believe 2.5 hours have gone by. That was such a...
Well, it's actually good timing because my sister's cat has just come and made it very clear that she's ready to be fed. So.
Oh, really? Where is she? Can we see her? Where's Hazelnut?
I just knocked her off the...
Oh, I see another pet on there. Laura Beth has an animal.
Yeah, that's right.
What was that? Was
Laura Beth has a very furry cat who was underfoot when you were trying to get her to move her feet in warrior pose. It was amazing.
Okay, I wasn't seeing that.
Yeah, I have 2 cats, and they both like to do yoga with me, and they're 15, but they're still very mobile, and yeah.
So what is that in cat years? Is it 7, or do cats have more?
It's 5. So yeah. They're 75.
75? Yeah, on which life are they on? 75 on which life?
Well, folks, I am going to bid adieu. It's a couple of minutes early, but the cat is calling me. So
cat is calling. Okay, you're getting cat called.
Again, I am being cat called. It's been lovely to be with you all again, and I hope we'll get to do it again soon.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And what I'm going to do as soon as this is over is make sure the recording downloads and encodes properly, and it's going to go right up on YouTube, and from there we'll put a link to it on that web page that we created for the workshop, and there it will live. And I think this is such a great session. I'm gonna do something with this beyond this workshop. I think people should just have a chance to experience this. So this was one of my more fun warrior series experiences, and some great inquiry and great things to think about. So thank you all so much. And as I said, I'm sorry the original recording got messed up, but I'm kind of happy we got to do this. So thank you. And thank you, Yulia and Jennifer and Jyoti and all you folks. This has been really fun hanging out with you. So
thank you so much, Leslie.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Take
Thank
good care,
you.
guys. See
Very
ya.
well.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.